Larry, hi.
I'm fine. How are you, Katie?
I'm good. Yeah, we need a little more headroom. Tell your young students to give you a little more headroom on
There
that. Thank you.
they go. There
Perfect.
they go. They know how to work these things. I
I
really
know.
don't.
Larry, thank you for doing this. Thank you for taking the time.
Sure.
It's 2 weeks till election day. A lot of people are thinking about the election. There's a lot of anxiety going on in the country, depending on who you're supporting. And I wanted to kind of just get an update for all my followers from you, Larry. So, let's look into that crystal ball of yours. 538 has Kamala Harris with a narrow 1.8% lead in their national poll. Tell me what you're thinking, how you're feeling, and I am going to remove the comments. Don't worry, everybody. Thank you for saying that. And if you have any questions for Larry, please put them in the questions section. Anyway, what do you think, Larry? What are you feeling?
Katie, it really is very close. That part of it is true. Often people say an election's close because they're trying to cover for the fact that they really don't know who's going to win. And actually, no one does. A lot of people on both sides will admit that after they talk to you for a half hour or so. And I don't either. But I will say it's closer than I expected it to be. And the sad part is, of course, we have 43 states sitting on the sidelines watching 7 states impose the next president on the rest of us. What those 7 states decide to do, obviously, the blue wall states of Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, the southern states of North Carolina and Georgia, and the western states of Arizona and Nevada. That's the ball game, and that's why you see the candidates flying back and forth and back and forth. A lot of the campaign is on autopilot right now because they've been planning for this for quite some time. Although we need to remember, Kamala Harris has had a very abbreviated campaign. She has not had the ability to plan a lot of this out in the same detail that another candidate has, that is Donald Trump. It's gotten closer. The general belief is that for Kamala Harris to win a majority of the Electoral College, she needs a lead of maybe 3 points. That's a guess based on the fact that Hillary led by 2.1% and still lost the Electoral College. And Joe Biden won by 4.5 percentage points, and yet he really was elected president by 43,000 votes in a handful of very close states.
Well, does the national standing in the polls really indicate who's going to win in these 7 crucial states, though, Larry? I mean, it could be quite different in terms of winning the popular vote versus getting enough electoral college votes, right? So how is that indicative of a victory?
Well, because it roughly translates. That is, again, going back to even 2000 when Al Gore won the popular vote by about 540,000, but lost the Electoral College vote because of 537 votes in Florida. We have a very strange system, Katie.
I was going to
Try
ask you
explaining it
about
to
that,
people in law.
Larry. I
Yeah.
mean, wait, what did you say? Sorry.
No, I said try explaining this, as I'm sure you have, to people around the globe. I do a lot of international TV and I get loads of email afterwards saying, what is this thing, the Electoral College? You mean that somebody who gets the most votes is going to lose? Or, well, not is going to, but very easily can. We've had 2 of those elections just since the turn of the century, or since 2000. So it's difficult. I would say at this point, instead of focusing on the polls, Katie, what people need to do is to turn off the TV. Now that you're not on it, if you were on there, I'd say keep the TV on. But turn off the TV and go out and work. Go out and work for the candidate of your choice, because that's what matters. It isn't what the polls say. The polls, every single swing state is within the margin of error. Some of them are dead tied. So the polls are meaningless. They have told us everything that they can tell us, Katie. And what they told us is it's extremely close. So now the only thing that matters is voter contact and get out the vote.
So that's what I was going to ask you. Well, 3 questions, Larry, just quick ones. I mean, every 4 years, there seems to be a discussion about whether we should get rid of the Electoral College. And every 4 years, people have these lengthy conversations and then come to the conclusion that it's impossible to get rid of. Is that true? I mean, it is frustrating that 7 states are deciding for everyone else in the country, but will it ever change?
Well, I tell people that actually a hidden provision in the Constitution abolishes the Electoral College, and the date that's going to happen is the 12th of never. So, no, it's never going to change. Katie, you know this. We could not pass a constitutional amendment to celebrate mothers. That's how divided we are in the United States. We would have red states fighting with blue states over who qualifies as a mother and what the reward would be, and it's hopeless. And I think for the foreseeable future, only once was there a serious effort to change the Electoral College, and that was in the late 1960s after George Wallace nearly threw the election into the House of Representatives. And finally, both Democrats and Republicans came together and said, this system has got to go. We need to go to a popular vote system. And what happened? Nothing, because you need a consensus to get a constitutional amendment passed. And the small states will never, ever pass the abolition of the Electoral College because they benefit so much from it.
Well, let's talk about, is it all so? Oh, I wanted to ask you, we've been looking at polls for a long time, Larry. Sorry, there's some like emergency outside my window. We've been looking at polls for a long time. And I guess the question is, are they more reliable? I have conversations with some friends who are political junkies, and they say, actually, they're much more reliable now than they were, and they were quite reliable in 2022. How do you feel about polls in general these days? Have they gotten
Uh,
better?
I think they have gotten somewhat better, but I think your friends are too optimistic. The polls were, if anything, as bad or worse in 2020 than they were in 2016. Yes, they got better in 2022. That was a midterm election. The reason they were better, I think, is because turnout always declines in a midterm election. Who votes in a midterm election? Disproportionately, it's college educated people. They answer the phone. They will fill out a survey online. The people that we have a hard time reaching in polling are Trump supporters, mainly non college educated, white, blue collar workers. And that hasn't changed. Now, I do know that some pollsters are waiting for additional variables. They're waiting, for example, the rural areas a little bit higher than they used to because Trump voters are concentrated in rural America. And they're doing some other things. So I think it's better, but I don't think they have fixed the problem at all. We're going to have to experiment really every 2 years and certainly every 4 years until we finally fix the problem, if we can.
So a lot of people are saying it's all going to be based on turnout, the get out the vote efforts. And it seems to me that the Trump campaign has a much better ground game than they did before. It's being run by real professionals who have had a lot of experience. Similarly, the Harris campaign has raised boatloads of money. Their ground game is really good. Whose ground game is better in your view, and whose effort to get out the vote seems to be superior?
The Democrats absolutely have the better ground game. The Trump campaign has subcontracted out a lot of the voter contact and get out the vote activities, and that's fine. But there are reports that some of these groups are misreporting what they've actually done. They're claiming credit for more than they've done, so they'll be paid sufficiently or paid more than
Oh.
they would be otherwise. This is something the Democrats have finally mastered. And you're right to point to the money that Kamala Harris has raised. She has outshone Donald Trump, even with all those billionaires throwing money at him, Elon Musk and the rest. So that is an advantage that Democrats have. And if Kamala Harris ends up winning, I think we can attribute a good bit of it to a much better ground game.
All right, let's kind of go state by state. We'll talk about Elon Musk in a minute, but let's talk about some of those swing states. Obviously, Pennsylvania is looming large in this campaign, as it always does. President Trump, former President Trump, set up shop at McDonald's yesterday. That moment kind of went viral. Some people think it might have helped him, although there was sadly an E. coli breakout at McDonald's
Was it
today.
the
Not at
same
that,
McDonald's,
no,
Katie?
not
Was
at
it the
that
same one? I
McDonald's.
wouldn't have been
No.
surprised, but I just wanted to
Apparently, a
ask.
lot of people were getting sick from quarter pounders.
Yeah.
Anyway, but let's talk about Pennsylvania. How's it looking for Harris versus Trump? And it's almost like Virginia is two different states, right, Larry?
Yes, no, well, it absolutely is. James Carville, an old friend of mine, famously said back in the '80s, I believe it was, that you have Philadelphia on one side and Pittsburgh on another, and in between you have Alabama. That's Pennsylvania for you, and that full credit to James for saying that. Look, it is tied. I'm not gonna. I've seen polls that have Trump up a point or two. I've seen polls that have Harris up a point or two. Again, what's important for people to know is this campaign is yet to be won. Neither side has won this. And you can go out, you who are out there right now in the online world, you can go out and make a difference. It's going to matter more than it does in most campaigns because they aren't this close.
We've seen an unprecedented number of early voting in a bunch of different states, Larry. I don't even know the number off the top of my head, but it's big. And tell me what that seems. Can we read the tea leaves in any way? I guess when it comes from Democratic leading areas, it means one thing. Republican leading areas, it means another. But how have you been able to interpret this large number of early voting we're seeing?
Well, it's really not out of line that much. We've crossed the 15 million mark, and this is going to continue to go up. Now, I think we will have somewhere around 160 million voters, so we have to keep this in perspective.
Well, more
It's
than
good. It's
17 million people have already voted. So that
17
seems
million.
like,
Okay, well, that's gone 2 million above where I saw it earlier today. So
yeah.
that's all to the good. But it's still a small proportion. Still, if you've got it this close in so many states, a few thousand votes here, a few thousand votes there can make a difference. Katie, I have rarely seen so much inaccurate information on places like Twitter. I'm sure it had nothing to do with Elon Musk, but I've seen inaccurate information about where these voters are coming from. We need to remember one thing. Everything changed in 2020, everything, because of COVID. And so now the rules are totally different. And we have one presidential election, one data point to compare what's happening now to then. And there's a big difference. What is it? COVID is not that much of a problem anymore. That's not what people are worried about. So you have different kinds of people going to the polls. For one thing, Trump in 2020 told people that the election was all corrupt and the mail ballot should never be trusted. Do
I
not go and vote a mail ballot.
remember.
You turn up on election day. Well, now he's, at least in some places, saying the opposite. And the Republican Party as a whole is trying to get people to use mail ballots. So you're getting more Republicans participating early. But it all evens out because these are not new voters. The people who vote early are your dependable regular voters. And they're simply trying to check something off the list early. That's what I do. I vote immediately as soon as it's open to the public. And a lot of people do that. So people who are trying to figure out what's going to happen in this election from looking at data, scattershot data coming in from various states about early voting, again, put down your calculators, get out and work.
All right. Let me ask you about this thing because I do think it's interesting. Many states have set records for the first day of early voting, and it's not just Democrats. So you're saying you really can't tell anything from that fact.
Nothing. Absolutely. All it is voters that would have showed up on election day voting earlier, which is a good idea because you never know what's going to happen to you on election day. Maybe your child gets sick or something happens and you're unable to make it to the polls. So having a chance to vote a couple of weeks early is a very good thing. Get it out of the way. Make sure you do it. But it doesn't mean anything in terms of the final vote.
Got it. Meanwhile, Philly officials say more than 1,200 voters so far returned their choices with an incorrect, or Philly officials say that more than 1,200 voters returned their choices with an incorrect or missing date, no signature, or no privacy envelope. In other words, a lot of these were returned. What's going to happen to all those votes? Will they just resubmit them?
Well, that's what should happen, and it's what must happen because the franchise is critically important to every citizen. It is important that we all have an equal opportunity to vote, and it seems to me that that is clearly a problem that is owed to the state and not to the individual. And even if an individual makes a small error on a ballot, doesn't fill in their zip code or whatever it may be, that's no reason to disallow somebody's ballot. And in most states, the registrars will actually call or email the individual saying, please come back in, we need to correct this. That's the way to do it. And I think that will happen in Pennsylvania because you have a governor who cares, Governor Josh Shapiro, and the attorney general there as well. I think will make certain this happens along with the court system.
Well, you mentioned Josh Shapiro. I know there's some people who are expressing buyer's remorse about Tim Walz and wondering why the Harris campaign didn't pick Josh Shapiro, which might have put them in a better position in Pennsylvania. Excuse me. What's your take on that, Larry?
Well, you're preaching to the choir. The very first name I mentioned after Kamala Harris emerged as the nominee was Josh Shapiro for VP. It made the most sense by far. Maybe Senator Kelly from Arizona second, but Josh Shapiro was the right pick. And we are still hearing things about why it wasn't Josh Shapiro. Some people in the Harris camp said that he came across too strong in the interview with Kamala Harris. My reaction to that is, who cares? It would be very good to have a person who comes across too strong winning Pennsylvania, but it's over. It didn't happen.
Coulda, woulda, shoulda.
Governor Walz is not a bad pick. I don't think he adds much because Minnesota is, if you can't carry Minnesota as a Democratic nominee for president, you shouldn't be the
I
Democratic
mean,
nominee
even
for president.
Mondale carried Minnesota. Well, of course
What's
he did.
that?
Even
Yeah,
Mondale carried
he
Minnesota.
did. Yeah, he
And that was
did.
it.
Yes, that was it. But it's a good thing he carried his home state, District of Columbia. He carried the district.
All right, let's talk about North Carolina. I think you believe that's heavily favored according to your crystal ball. It looks like it'll break for Donald Trump. Yes?
Probably. I'm not, because you have two factors that are difficult to account for. The first is that the Republican nominee for governor has crashed and burned. He's
I
going
mean,
to lose.
why isn't that having a greater impact and helping Harris more in the state?
Well, it might. That's why I'm saying I don't feel as confident saying absolutely positively you'll have North Carolina going Republican because Trump carried it in 2016 and 2020, and of course Romney carried it in 2012. But I think it's important to look first at the governor, the Republican nominee Mark Robinson, crashing and burning. He's going to lose by 10 to 15 points.
Even
That might.
even Lindsey Graham called it. What did he say? He called the revelations beyond unnerving. If you guys don't know about Mark Robinson, Google
Yeah,
it. It's very entertaining and bizarre. Go
I
on.
don't want to discuss it, that's for sure.
Yeah.
And the second reason, Katie, is because of the hurricane. The hurricane has caused tremendous devastation in the western part of North Carolina.
Which
Now,
is
look,
which is always Republican, though, right?
well, Asheville is pretty heavily Democratic. There
Yes.
are Democratic parts, but mainly it's Republican. Now, I give full credit to the officials in North Carolina, both Democrats and Republicans. They're trying to get the ballots out to people who were displaced, but some of these people are living in other states now. Some of them still don't have cell service. They don't have communications. So it's going to be difficult to get everybody the ballot that they need or would have had the hurricane not happened. So that probably disproportionately hurts Trump. But if you absolutely force me to predict today, and I know how you are, Katie, you will do that. You have always gotten your way with me. And I would say probably it will go to Trump.
Okay, let's talk about Michigan because you think Kamala's strongest showing may, in fact, be in Michigan. Why?
Well, that's the opinion of my House editor, has a lot of contacts in Michigan. I've heard very contradictory things about Michigan because the Arab American population is quite large there.
And that's
They're
in
not going,
Dearborn outside
they're
Detroit.
born and a lot of other places now. That population has dispersed within Michigan. But of course, they're very upset about the Middle East situation. They are very upset with Biden because of all the aid to Netanyahu and on and on. They're not going to vote for Trump. The vast majority of them won't vote for Trump. But they're talking about just leaving the presidential line blank, which I think is a terrible mistake. And I urge everybody, regardless of who you're going to vote for, to vote for a presidential candidate. That's too important to skip. But I'm less certain about Michigan. I think it's closer than people think, and the private surveys are showing it to be tied.
Gretchen Whitmer has been a big the governor, enthusiastic supporter of Kamala Harris's. That's not going to help in Michigan, in
No,
your view? She's quite
it,
popular there.
it will help. But, endorsements can only do so much. How many votes did Taylor Swift really get for Kamala Harris? I think she got young people to register. So that's half of the way there. But people usually don't vote for candidates based on a celebrity endorsement. You need more than that. And a governor is a celebrity, and Gretchen Whitmer in particular. Gretchen Whitmer is a celebrity. But that alone can't help. Her organization is helping more than her endorsement is.
What about the union members in Michigan, Larry? I mean, we've sort of seen an interesting split among them, haven't we?
Yes. When I was growing up, Katie, long before you were born, the
Yeah, sure.
the unions were heavily Democratic. That's where you started if you were a Democrat. Blue collar workers, you went to the union precincts, you got the union endorsements, the international endorsements for money. Well, that's changed. And now the leadership of most unions, most, not all, most unions is still Democratic. But the rank and file are split, sometimes right down the middle, as with the UAW.
And wasn't it the union leader who was at the RNC endorsing? Was that the AFL-CIO?
That was UAW. Yeah,
UAW, the UAW, the
yes.
head of the UAW endorsed Trump at the RNC.
Well, no, they didn't endorse him. They just said nice things about him. And the president of the union has gotten a lot of criticism for doing that. Democrats were very unhappy with him. But again, I think today, with a lot of information out there, and union members have access to it too, they make up their own minds. They're not going to listen to leadership. They will about a contract negotiation because the leadership has their interests at heart and knows the details. But about endorsements of candidates, no, most of them will make up their own
How
minds.
are Arizona and Nevada looking, Larry?
Arizona is looking leaning Trump. I would put it that way. Not strongly, but it is leaning to Trump. Look, Biden only won it by what, 10,000 votes, somewhere in that vicinity. So and Arizona normally votes Republican. So we're having a little bit of a bounce back from 2020 in some of these states, like Georgia as well, and North Carolina. But Georgia and Arizona in particular. Nevada is another one. I've seen one private poll just in the last 24 hours. Absolute dead tie. Absolute dead tie. I mean, you can't call a state based on the data we have now.
I wanted to ask you about how motivated people are by the issue of abortion. It's something that I know a lot of women care deeply about. They're really motivated by their desire to maintain reproductive rights and bodily autonomy for women in this country. But Trump has kind of backpedaled on this and has sort of tried to thread the needle so people don't feel that he is as anti-abortion as his Supreme Court obviously is. And then also JD Vance kind of skirted around it saying he's not for a national ban, he's just for national standards, which is in essence a ban if he says, after 6 weeks or whatever. So is that still a powerful issue for Democrats, or has that decreased some in recent weeks?
No, I think it is still very powerful. And if Kamala Harris ends up with an upset in some places, some close states, it will be attributed, at least in good part, to the reproductive rights issue. Just as in 2022, not that long after Donald Trump's Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade, you had a very strong vote by both men and women who were Democrats, but mainly women Democrats, for the Democratic Party. Remember, the Republicans were heavily favored to pick up seats because Biden's
Right.
popularity was in the 30s, and it's still only in the low 40s, Katie. If Kamala Harris loses, it wasn't all Kamala Harris. You cannot win a race like that usually if your president is below 45%.
There are also
And
a lot of referenda and ballot initiatives
yeah,
in several states that may increase voter turnout regarding abortion and
yeah,
reproductive rights, which might increase voter turnout in those states, which is good for Harris.
yes, no, I agree with that. And as I say, if she wins an upset here or there, look first to the vote on reproductive rights.
I have to ask you about the latest. Of course, you heard in Bob Woodward's book some of the comments Mark Milley made about Donald Trump being fascist to the core. I'd love to have another conversation with you another time about if fascist is an appropriate term for Donald Trump. The Wall Street Journal said Democrats shouldn't use that term, and they're going whole hog into that. But we heard Mark Milley say that, right, or read that in Bob Woodward's latest book. And now in another book, it is reported that Trump said to John Kelly, his longest serving chief of staff while in office, I need the kind of generals Hitler had. This is in Peter Baker and Susan Glasser's new book, I understand. And then yesterday, a group called Survivors for Harris, a coalition of sexual abuse survivors, including Anita Hill, published a full page ad in the New York Times reminding people that Donald Trump was found liable for sexual abuse in a court of law, is a proven abuser. So we're talking about two obviously different issues. But I guess the question is, will this resonate with undecided voters or even sway any Trump voters when he originally said I could stand on Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody and nobody would care?
Oh, we're still there. This won't affect 10 Trump voters in the entire country. Katie, they made up their minds a long time ago. They don't even listen to critical information about Trump. And also, the undecided vote, it's about 2% or less now. The people who are going to vote know for whom they're going to vote. I just need to add one point to what you said. Jim Sciutto from CNN, you probably know him, had this first from General Kelly in his book. I believe it was in March. He published a book about international relations, and I was shocked when I read what Kelly, who's a very honorable fellow, his son was killed in Iraq or Afghanistan, I've forgotten which, and he himself is a general, and he was one of Trump's chiefs of staff. And he reported all of it to Jim Sciutto, and Jim, as a good reporter does, reported it as well. I was just stunned to see what Trump said about Hitler's generals, that he wanted to have generals like Hitler. Well, this is the second telling of it, and there'll be a third telling because, Katie, it's true. Of course, the Trump campaign, the high command is denying it. It fits everything we know about Trump. He has a fascination with Hitler, and we have to face facts. We have to face facts. These are difficult facts, but you have to face them because it's 2 weeks to election day, and then we're stuck with somebody for 4 years.
Do you think that, I mean, everything you've read, and Larry, nobody is quite as informed about politics as you are. Is it fair to say Donald Trump is a fascist or a threat to democracy in your view?
Well, I'm not going to get in. I'm not going to wade into the fascist dispute, although he certainly has fascist tendencies. I will say this: if we can rely on what he has said, and he often follows through on these promises, you ought to listen to what he says because he tries to do it. He and his key aides who are going to be moving into the White House with him have talked about military tribunals for people like former Joint Chiefs of Staff Chair Mark Milley and other senior military leaders who Trump regards as being rebels against him. They have talked about detention camps. They've talked about exporting, meaning throwing out of the country, up to 14 million people who are living in the United States. Now, to me, these are parts of Donald Trump's threat to democracy. We also have January 6th. He tried to steal a 4-year term, Katie. He's the first president in American history who tried to steal a term to stop the peaceful transfer of power. Why do people think he wouldn't do it again?
And why are so many of his supporters okay with that?
They're okay with it because, first, I think a lot of them say, oh, well, that's just Trump. He doesn't really mean it, except he has. He's done some of these things, but that's what they say. And then they simply regard him as a hero because he takes on the elites, he takes on the establishment, and they feel downtrodden too by the elites. So they identify with him. It's kind of odd thinking about people making, $30,000 a year identifying with someone who I think is a billionaire. He always exaggerates his wealth. But it's really remarkable that people will ignore the facts if they even know the facts. How do you get the facts anymore? When you were running the CBS Evening News, people watched those evening news shows to a much greater degree than they do today. Where do people get their news? From social media, where there's so much misrepresentation and outright lying.
And also, people create their own media ecosystem and echo chamber. And so you just get, as my friend Nicole Seligman says, affirmation instead of information.
Exactly. People want to be with people who think just like them, except you don't learn a whole lot that way, and you certainly don't build bridges. You don't keep America together. And I'm very worried. A lot of people that I know who are in this field are very worried about what's going to happen after this election.
Well, let's talk about that. What are they worried about specifically, Larry?
Violence. That's number one on everybody's list. If Donald Trump loses, you can count on it. First of all, he's going to deny he lost. And we're going to have a long process of appeals through the courts and through the Republican-controlled House. It's likely that the Republicans will take over the Senate. We don't know what the House results will be, but the House is Republican until January 3rd. So he's got a lot of allies. And did I mention the Supreme Court with 6 strong Trump judges? Do you really think those justices are not going to take Trump into account? They've ruled for him on practically everything that really matters to him. So he's got a lot of aces up his sleeve once this election is over, if he loses. Now, if he wins, everything will be fine because he has said the only honest election is one that I win. That's contrary to the essence of democracy. You have to support democracy when you lose. That's the real test of democracy. You can't just support it when you win.
I talked to Neil Katyal the other day, and I don't know if you know Neil, Larry, but he wrote an op-ed in the New York Times about all the kind of infrastructure that has been put in place at the state level, either in state legislatures or board of electors, that are basically, even if Trump does lose in some of these states, they have the power or the authority to overturn the votes in their states.
Well,
that seems so crazy to me.
Katie,
How
they
can
can
they do
refuse
that?
to certify the election results. That's the power that some of them have, refusing to certify the election results. And then they can take it further because if they have a Republican governor and particularly a Republican legislature, well, then they're going to have the power potentially for the legislature to send the Republican slate of electors even to Washington, even if the Democrats won, or they may send both slates of electors, and then you'll have January 6th all over again because the Republicans will probably try to impose the Republican electors on the total count. The other alternative they have is simply to tie up so many states that neither candidate can get to 270, all right? And then it goes to the House of Representatives to determine the next president. And Trump is guaranteed to win that, guaranteed. Because of the crazy provision in the Constitution since 1789 that says each of the states has one vote. So Texas gets one, and Florida gets one, and New York gets one, and California gets one, and Vermont and Wyoming and all these lightly populated states get one. And you have to have 26 votes to be elected president. Well, even if Republicans don't have the House of Representatives, even if they lose the House, they'll probably have 26 House delegations. So they can impose Trump.
I don't understand that. Even if they don't, if even if they lose the House, I don't understand how they could have 26 delegations.
Because the small state delegations, frequently consisting of one member or two members, they have one vote, just like California does. So you may have Kamala Harris winning with 63% in California. In other words, having tens of millions of votes, but they get one vote. And in North Dakota, she will get 35%, but it amounts to just a narrow number of people actually voting. But that particular representative is Republican. It is now and will be again. And that vote will go to Donald Trump. So North Dakota will cancel out California. And you go on down the list like that, and you're going to find at least 26 delegations that will be Republican. That's how.
Got it. I want to ask you, so a lot of people have asked, well, I can't believe we've got so many questions from viewers. We'll just take a few. Are there preparations in case Trump loses and acts as though he has won? What do you think the government is doing to prepare for potential violence?
Well, they have declared the Congress as a special security risk zone for January 6th. And unlike in 2021, when they weren't prepared, because no one imagined January 6th, nobody imagined a president trying to seize power, really. But now we can imagine it thanks to Donald Trump. That's the one favor he's done for us, I suppose. So you will have National Guard, you will have other troops and police, you will have the Capitol well protected. So that's one thing they're doing. But that doesn't stop what's going to happen in the Congress itself. And let's remember, this Republican Party and the people being elected to the House and Senate, they're different than the Republicans you and I grew up with. We were used to Gerald Ford and Ronald Reagan and the Bushes. These are not Republicans like them. They are die-hard Trump supporters, either because they really believe it or because they're afraid to cross Trump and their own people in their own state. So they'll do what he
And all
wants.
they want is to stay in power. Someone asks, how does Elon Musk's involvement in what is essentially a vote buying in swing states? I think the rest of it is factor into this.
Uh, Look, he's not going to make that much difference. He's given 75 million. He may have given over 100 million by now, and it sounds like a lot. Except both candidates, in the end, will spend billions.
And they
Counting what
just
their party.
mentioned, I just read that Bill Gates gave the Harris campaign $50 million.
Yes, well, that helps to
It's
balance
the battle of
somewhat.
the
Yeah,
billionaires, Larry.
sure. Well, after all, they're very special people, Katie, and they should be running the country. I think we all agree on that. We talked about our robot governors one day. Well, we already have the billionaire governors, and I'm very grateful because they might take after me otherwise.
You're being very, very sarcastic
I
here,
am
Larry.
indeed.
But
You know me.
I have to ask you: is what Elon Musk is doing, is that
I
legal?
don't think it is, but here's just a guess, Katie, and you can hold me to this, but it's just a guess. I don't think the richest man in the world who has a whole law firm full of lawyers has anything to worry about. Look at what Trump has done. How many indictments has he had? We haven't had any trials. He stretches it out. I think someone who's much richer than Donald Trump will be able to take care of that because we have the best justice system that money can buy.
This is maybe out of your wheelhouse, Larry, but if Trump loses, do you think he will go to prison?
Well, I think there's a good likelihood that he will be incarcerated in some form. Maybe it'll be an ankle bracelet. Maybe instead of a prison, it'll be Mar-a-Lago. But he has done some outrageous things, including January 6th, but also with the documents, the very confidential, highly secret documents that he shared with others and refused to give back. He could have given it back with no charges, but no, He was going to keep them because they were his, except they weren't.
So I wanted to ask you about what you think the candidates will do in the next 2 weeks. I know Trump is going to a lot of blue states, which seems kind of odd. You know, he went to Coachella, he had an event at Madison Square Garden, was recently in Colorado, which I guess is sort of a purple state, right? I
No,
mean,
Colorado is voting for Harris.
is
Uh,
solidly
it's
blue. Um,
just like Virginia. They're
Okay.
solid.
Well, why do you think he's going to these blue states, and what do you think Kamala Harris should be doing in the next 2 weeks?
Trump is going to the blue states because no matter where you go in our multimedia age, you're covered fully. Everybody's going to see it, whether they're in a red state or a purple state or a blue state. And second, the Trump people are trying to give the impression that they're rolling to a massive victory and they're going to shock people in some of these blue states. All over Twitter today, you had people saying, "Did you hear? Trump is ahead in Virginia." Zero evidence, nothing cited. There is no evidence. He's not ahead in Virginia. He's nowhere near where Kamala Harris is. But you see, if you put it out there on Twitter enough, you're going to have thousands and thousands of people retweeting it and saying, "Did you hear? Did you hear?" And they'll give more money and they'll work harder. It's a psychology game. That's all it is.
And what do you think Kamala Harris, I almost said her name like Trump does.
Yeah.
What do you think Kamala Harris should be doing in the next 2 weeks?
Uh, what she should be doing is what her campaign hasn't done enough of, which is pointing out the threat, the very real threat that a second term of Donald Trump presents, not just to our republic, but to republics around the world. I'm not
I
just
feel
thinking
like
of Ukraine, but
I feel like Larry, she's been really emphasizing that of late and talking a lot about it. Could that not backfire? I'm not saying that she shouldn't do it, but I mean, will that start to fall on deaf ears if all these things he does doesn't seem to move the needle among his supporters? Do you think the 2% of undecideds, or people who are not that motivated to actually go out and vote, will start saying, "Well, what are you going to do? What is your vision for the country? Is this just an anti-Trump vote?"
well, she's had 2.5 months as a candidate, so you have to cut her some slack
Oh, no, no,
because
no,
of
I'm
that.
not being critical. I'm just
Yeah, no,
asking if that
I know, but
strategy
I'm
can
pointing
hurt
this
her.
out to your viewers because some might say, yeah, that's right. She's had 2.5 months. She hadn't expected to be in this role either. But look, you cannot save a people from themselves, Katie. You can't do it. I keep going back to what Benjamin Franklin said to the person he ran into outside the Constitutional Convention Hall. What have you given us, Mr. Franklin? Franklin answers, a republic if you can keep it. And if we, the people, can't keep it, it's going to go away.
Someone often says to me, the country will get the president it deserves,
Well, we
which
always
makes
have.
which makes me which makes me sad. Before we go, what do you think of Ted Cruz's chances of winning? I think Colin Allred has put on a pretty good campaign. I guess he's 3 or 4 points behind. Is Texas just destined to go support Ted Cruz again?
Well, if you were betting, you would bet on Cruz because that's the pattern in Texas. And believe me, Trump will win Texas by whatever, 6, 7, 8, 9, I don't know. It'll be somewhere in that vicinity. And that's probably enough to pull Cruz in, who's already ahead anyway. Now, look, Colin already has run a very good campaign. So did Beto O'Rourke 6 years ago against Cruz. But you see, they come close, but they can't get over the finish line because Texas has not evolved blue enough. Maybe it will eventually, although notice how many Latinos are voting now for Trump and for Republicans. So I don't know when it's going to happen. But I'll tell you something. I'm blue in the face from having people call me every 4 years telling me that Texas is turning blue. I'm going to believe it when I see it.
And why do you think so many? Sorry, I love talking to you, Larry, and I'm going to go because my husband's waiting to go and grab a bite of food with me. But why do you think Latinos are going for Trump in pretty big numbers?
Well, part of it's the economy. They are very upset about inflation. as though a president could wave a magic wand in the Oval Office and deal with inflation. Think about the times when we've had it before. So they're upset about that, and they think that a president controls that, which is not true. And the second reason is because Trump presents the strongman image that really appeals to
Yeah, it's
many
just the
Hispanic
kind of
men,
macho thing.
the macho thing. And really, I've had Hispanic men tell me that. So, this isn't just coming from a white perspective. It's coming from the Latino community. I've heard it. I've talked to them about it.
And Black men, well, we've been discussing that a lot in recent weeks. And I just did a podcast about this with Charlemagne the God and Ested Herndon. You know, Black men are still voting overwhelmingly for Kamala Harris. I guess the support of that voting bloc for Democrats has just started to erode. Is that why everyone's hair is on fire about Black men?
Well, there's a good reason for it. There is a somewhat larger percentage. I don't think it's nearly as high as some of the polls have registered. I think it, maybe mid-teens will end up voting for Trump.
16% or something, right?
May even be a little less than that. But, normally a Republican gets 8 to 10% of the black vote. Now, Republican women, black women have stayed very loyal to Kamala Harris. And so far, at least, Trump is getting only about 8% or so of black women. So that will bring down the black percentage overall. But look, it's the same thing. I've heard, back here on the lawn, many of my neighbors are young black men. And they've told me that they're friends from black fraternities, and maybe some of them, but they haven't identified themselves, see Trump as a strong person. And they have a hang up about voting for a black woman. Don't think I agree with that, because I certainly do not. I'm simply reporting to you what people have told me.
What is their hang up?
Voting for a woman, Katie. If Kamala Harris loses, we will have had exactly 2 women nominees for president in U.S. history, and both of them will have lost. Now, what does that tell you?
That it's a very depressing note to end this conversation on.
Katie, it may be a depressing year, and we've got to come to terms with it.
Well, and do you think, I mean, clearly we're not going to know who the next president is, the day after the election. How long do you think? Well, God, who knows, right,
Who
Larry?
knows? Who knows? I mean, that's go ahead and bet on that, because nobody would have any inside information. Everybody would be equal on the betting market. But I don't bet, by the way. We're not permitted to bet doing what I do. But I couldn't tell you. I hope it will be relatively soon. That is sometime in that week, in that election week. Last time it was Saturday of the week where the Tuesday election was held. And that reduces the probability of violence. But we still have the possibility of it. And if this thing goes for weeks, and then you get out into the states and you got phony electors being sent to Washington by some Republican state legislatures, we're in real trouble. And people need to get that. They need to get it before the election.
Larry, I love talking to you, even when it's about this country facing some really challenging times. But thank you for doing this. It's great to see you. Wahoo and all that jazz. And I
Wahoo,
hope.
you look great. I've got to tell you, you're sparkling like you always are, but you look terrific. And I need to tell you that.
Thank you,
And
Larry.
I love you. I love you. You know that.
Thank you, Larry.
All
Thank you
right.
so much. Maybe it's because I'm a grandmother, Larry.
That's hard to
Isn't
believe.
that
Really, it is.
crazy? Anyway, I hope people watch this even if they weren't able to tune in live, because you're always so insightful and fun to talk to. And let's stay in touch and keep
Yeah,
talking over the next few weeks. And
we
tell
will.
everyone in Charlottesville I said hey.
I'll do it. They all love you too.
Thanks,
Bye bye,
Larry.
Katie.
Bye. Bye,
See ya.
everyone.
Bye bye.